Okay, I think it's time we talk about Shield Hero on this channel. A somewhat controversial anime, for reasons that I will not be getting into for fear of the dreaded yellow money symbol, but you'll probably know what I'm talking about even if you have somehow managed to avoid spoilers for like the first 2 episodes. And once again, we have 4 different characters to get through, so let's stop wasting time and get into it. The country of Melmark is one in crisis, with monsters attacking in ever-increasingly strong waves. So what do? Well, like any good company, or kingdom in this case, they outsource their work by hiring outsiders that have little to no choice but to do what they're told. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but the point still stands. Usually when the waves appear, the different kingdoms each summon one hero. But this time, the king, who will hereby be known as the Trash Man, went behind the queen's back, who by the way actually has all the authority in Melmark, and summoned all 4 at once. And worse than that, he didn't even want all 4. He just didn't want the other kingdoms to be able to defend themselves because he's trash. And even more than that, Melmark follows the Church of the 3 Heroes, which specifically leaves out the Shield Hero. So not only did he summon all the heroes at once so the other nations would be weakened, but he also shunned the Shield Hero pretty much right off the bat. But before we talk about the Shield Hero, let's talk about someone a little closer to Trash Man here. Like maybe, I don't know, the daughter he didn't spoil rotten? That would be the second princess, Melty Melmark. And due to her older sister, let's say being a problem child, she's also the crown princess despite being several years younger than her older sister Melty. Now Melty was raised by her mother after she saw what her husband's spoiling did to Melty. She is a little sheltered, but overall she is a much better person than her older sister, even if she's only 10 years old. I also think this makes her the youngest character I've built. Even Priestess and Goblin Slayer was 15. Age aside, Melty is effectively the exact opposite of her sister. When Melty and her father pushed the Shield Hero away and branded him a criminal, Melty tries to make amends and even helps clear his name after her own family and the church try to have her assassinated for defending the Shield Hero. And that doesn't go too well for them. So with all that said, let's get in and see what her lineage or species is. And I think it's pretty easy to tell that she is going to be a human, so she gets an extra skill. I chose Arcana for that because she seems to study a lot. And to go along with that, I chose the extra origin feat Magic Initiate Wizard, giving her a cantrip and an extra spell. And since we don't have a royalty background, Noble will have to do in its place, meaning Melty starts off with 6 skills before we even get to her class. But before that, we also have to look at her stats. And going in reverse this time, it shouldn't be much of a shock that the 10-year-old sheltered princess is dumping strength. I sincerely doubt the princess had any physical exercise in all of her studies. The same goes for Khan. She spends most of her time reading, studying, and casting spells. Not really the ideal way to build up a strong and durable body. She's also, like I said, a bit sheltered, as tends to be the case with royalty, but not to an extreme degree. So I'm throwing her 12 into Wisdom. She's more about books and studying anyway. And speaking of books, Melty gives me the impression of someone that's very studious and studies a lot, or just reads a lot of books for fun. So 114 goes into her intelligence, while the other one goes into her dexterity. Sure, she needs it for AC, but running around the woods in any sort of a formal shoe is not an easy task. Meaning her highest stat is going to be in Charisma. Look, if she's going to be taking over for the Queen one day, she needs to know how to talk the talk, how to negotiate with other kingdoms, and how to deal with issues within her own borders. And yeah, she's young, but I think Melty is already a lot more mature and well-spoken than a lot of people, her father included. Now, if it hadn't been for her trash father and name I'm not allowed to say on YouTube sister, Melty would have likely just followed the same path as her mother and eventually became queen. But thanks to her father being a moron and his blatant hatred for the Shield Hero, it kinda pushed her at least a little bit into fighting on the Shield Hero's side for a time. But honestly, we don't actually have all that many examples of Melty fighting, because believe it or not, the 10-year-old crown princess can't always go around traveling the countryside fighting monsters. And given her limited time with the party, we only have so much to work with. But we do know she has some healing magic, along with blades of water, summoning rainstorms, countering fire spells with Fire Squall, and she can create hammers or move the ground with earth magic. Another thing to point out is that magic in this world seems mostly inherited, or kinda like everyone has magic naturally. They just need to train with it if they want to make any actual use of it. So Melty could get quite a bit stronger over time. Hell, the fact that at 10 years old, she is at the very least matching her older sister in magical ability, which says a lot about her level of talent. So with that in mind, I think the Sorcerer fits Melty best. And because these can always be a little hard to pin down the exact subclass unless it is like spot on, I use the fact that she has healing magic to give her the Divine Soul Sorcerer subclass. Meaning she gets spells from the Cleric list and the Sorcerer list on top of getting favored by the gods. And with how few fights Melty's in, it was kinda hard for me to pick out her exact level. She's also really good at controlling her own magic, even if she isn't casting these super big flashy spells, and that just screams meta magic to me. But seeing as she seems a little bit weaker than the rest of the Shield Heroes party, and some of her bigger spells involve creating balls of water or making objects out of the earth, so using those I think I can get a pretty good estimate. Also, I mentioned it a moment ago, but her meta magic also helps with her being limited in her elements, because the transmute spell option lets her change the damage type of her other spells to the damage type of a different spell she has. It's kind of the best way to have a single element themed caster in 5e that isn't a fire wizard. Now like I said, one of her higher level spells involves making a big ball of water and controlling the earth. And at least on the earth side, the best thing I could find as an analog is the 5th level spell Wall of Stone, which again, like damn, with most of the parties nowadays getting barely past level 10, for the princess to be right around there is pretty impressive. Oh, and speaking of that, yeah, I'm making Melty level 10 because I want more meta magic options to round out her stuff, like careful spells so she doesn't hit her friends, heightened spells so they hit more often, and quicken spell, because it's good and she has fast spells. Which means she has 4 different meta magic options, including transmute spell from before. And that's as far as Melty goes, at least when it comes to the anime, not including any light novel or manga stuff. She's not all that much of a fighter, but she is a very mature girl with a real talent for magic, and I'm sure she's going to be a great queen one day. Just maybe be careful around her sister, or better yet, kick her out of the country entirely so she's no longer a problem.
Excuse me. Now whose pie are you poisoning there, sister? It's not yours, is it?
Yeah, who knew single class, lower level characters were super fast to make, right? But before we move on to the next character, I of course want to make sure that if you like these videos, you are subscribed to the channel. We are getting so close to 10k subs before the end of the year. We might already be there by the time this video comes out. I don't know. It's still 2 weeks before this video comes out for me. But that would be a huge milestone for us. And if you want to take part in voting on what teams I make next, you can do that on my Patreon if you are a $3 tier member or higher. But don't worry, just being a $1 member will still get you the entire character file. And lastly, if you're looking to run a game but don't have time to do all the writing, map setting up, and NPCs, or given the season, you want to give your Forever DM a break and give them something pre-written, why not check out the Wandering Tavern? It's got maps, NPCs, magic items, and everything you need for a mini campaign already inside. And using my code GMG, you can get a whole 10% off. All the more money to expand your dice collection. Now, back to the video. Since Melty was a pretty low-level character, and probably the simplest one I've made for a while, or will make for a while, let's change that by going into one of the more complicated characters, Filo. Yes, this bird girl, is a party member that joined Naofumi's party after he bought a gacha egg and she just kinda hatched out of it. Yeah, and that's kind of it. When your backstory starts with you hatched into the hero's party, you don't have a whole lot to go off of. She is really good friends with Melty though. They hang out all the time and do sleepovers, it's kinda cute. And there's also the fact that she's supposed to be the next queen of the Philolians, and we'll go over what Philolians are, now I guess. Philolians are a species of giant birds that kinda take the place of horses in this world, and if you're thinking chocobos, yeah, they're kinda just extra fluffy chocobos. But Filo is a bit of a special case. She started off super small, got big enough to pull a cart, which she apparently loves, and then shrunk again after she got a humanoid form thanks to Naofumi. But she can still take on her giant bird form whenever she wants. She also seems to prefer fighting in that form. It's kind of 50-50. Now there isn't a giant ostrich bird race in D&D, so let's look at our options here since there are 3 of them. The shifter was something I considered early on. You know, she goes from humanoid to big bird and back. But the issue with shifters is their transformation is, for one thing, only temporary, and another, it's really not all that drastic. It only has small animalistic features showing up. And I think our other options are a bit better. The owl was something I've never really looked at before, big owl people, but their main thing is stealth proficiency, and while Filo can kind of fly, she's not exactly stealthy when she's moving around. At least not in her bird form, she's way too big. And lastly is the Aarakocra, which has 2 things that the other options are missing. First off, talons. Filo uses them to fight in her bird form and kind of in her human form. But Aarakocra also have wind magic, which happens to be Filo's specialty. And while they are missing the transformation between bird and human, We'll get that in just a minute. But first, her background, which is a little bit harder to pin down, but we do have a bit to go off of. Since Filo is a bird, yeah, I've said that a few times by now, but I do have a point. Throughout the story, Filo has a tendency to sing, performing in taverns and the like, sometimes with help from Melty. She's even been called an idol before. So given that this is the most defining thing we have for what Filo does outside of fighting with the heroes party, I think giving her the entertainer background actually suits her really well. And before we go over how Filo goes from this to this, we're going to look at her stats real quick. And these are just going to be for her human form, since her giant bird form is going to have a different source of stats. So, given her bird-like nature and just how small she is, I think a focus on dex over strength is better here, since strength will be covered by other stuff. The same goes for wisdom, her other highest stat. Birds have pretty good senses, and Filo is also a really good judge of character. Although to be fair, anyone would be creeped out by Motoyasu doing whatever this is. And despite her size, she can actually take a decent hit. She even got eaten by a dragon one point and got out just fine. After that, I think I'm going to throw her 12 into Charisma since she is likable and through her bird instincts knows how to sing pretty well. 10 in Strength since again, small, and 8 in Intelligence. She is like less than a year old or at least somewhere around there. And now we can get back to making Filo into a giant bird, which did take me a little bit of time to figure out how I would get that to work, but I think if we take her first few levels in Druid, we can get a monster that fits right into the Philolian form. Now you might think with her bird form being a huge, mostly flightless bird, that it would be like an ostrich or something like that. But yeah, the monster manual doesn't have that, and the new monster manual isn't out yet, and I have no idea if they're going to add one of those. But what they do have is an axebeak, a large, flightless bird with strong legs, a sharp beak, and likes to attack things that it's not familiar with. Which, if you've ever met an ostrich, yeah, that tracks, but it kind of just seems like they wanted to add a fancy name onto the bird. But it is still a beast, and it's only of CR 1/4, mostly because its stats kinda suck. But with how the new wild shape rules work, that's not really as big of a deal. Like one of the big changes where you can still speak while in wild shape. I'm pretty sure that's new. You also keep most of what makes you, you, only really swapping your hard stats like strength, dex, and con, while keeping your HP, hit dice, soft stats, class features, and pretty much everything else. And since you no longer swap your HP for the beast's HP, instead you get a bunch of temporary hit points equal to your druid level, which at low levels is not a lot, but you also don't drop your wild shape when those hit points are gone. So Filo can swap between her two forms and retain the same health pool, and even better for her, if we have her go with, say, the Circle of the Moon, which did unfortunately lose the elemental forms, she gets 3 times her druid level in temp HP, meaning she's going to get 21 temporary hit points every time she wild shapes because I'm planning on going 7 levels in for Elemental Fury, just so she can get some wind on her talons with extra thunder damage. Oh, and improve circle forms if she wants some radiant damage, but probably better to go with the thunder since it's more thematic. She could also technically get some much stronger forms here. I'm just focused on the Axebeak because it's the only thing that she realistically turns into. But if you want to get her some stronger forms and just reflavor them, well, who's going to stop you? Other than your DM, but then they're no fun. Now going to level 7 in Druid does also mean she gets an ASI, and for that I went with a +2 bonus to Dex since that is about to become her main damaging stat. Because Filo is jumping from Druid over to the other heavy Dex and Wisdom class, the Monk. Since when not in her bird form, Filo fights with gauntlet-style weapons and wind magic, and doing this will mean she gets to keep her ability to unarmed strike while wild-shaped, so she can use any of her Monk features as a giant bird like healing off of uncanny metabolism, using extra attack, flurry of blows, or using her wind magic, which she can grab by going into the new Warrior of the Elements subclass, giving her attacks a range of 10 feet, and letting her add thunder damage to her attacks. Which is really the best way for me to represent wind damage, since Wizards of the Coast refuses to add more damage types to represent different elements, even though I feel like it would be pretty easy and allow you to make a whole bunch of new spells. Anyways, I also wanted the slow fall feature because while Filo can't fly, she can at least use her wings to slow her fall. She obviously also gets extra attack and a few ASIs or feats, which means a total of 8 levels in Monk, rounding her out to a total level of 15. So she gets features like Stunning Strike, and more importantly, Elemental Burst for some more of her wind magic. And of course, Evasion to help her dodge some fireballs. Don't want her nice soft feathers getting all singed. But going to level 8 also means she gets those 2 ASIs I mentioned, one of which is going into the speedy feat, so she can actually have a movement speed of 55 in her humanoid form and 75 as a bird. That's a fast bird, not even counting if you get like a faster form and just treat it as a bird. And her other ASI goes into Dex to max it out at 20, making sure Filo gets the highest AC she can, she hits harder, and she dodges better. Her con is a little low despite her once getting eaten by like a zombie dragon, which of course she lived, but having a free 21 temporary hit points every time she wild shapes probably made up for that. So honestly, she could do just fine on the front lines, even without her shield father using buffing spells and such. I'm pretty sure she sees him as a father figure, he did hatch her after all. Now there are technically a few powers Filo has that I didn't really touch on here, since a lot of her stuff is just kinda kicking people with wind magic. But in Season 2, she does get some music magic for a time, and I actually did make an alternate build for Filo where she has some bard levels to kinda cover that. That is going to be on this full character file for $1 on Patreon. I'm not going over it here because this video is going to be long enough and I'm not going to re-go over Filo. But even without her song powers, Filo is a powerful fighter, swapping between her human and bird forms for whichever one she needs, and keeping enemies at bay with a flurry of claws and wind spells.
I hate you, spear guy.
You mean you're that big fat...
So, moving on from Filo, we have one more character to add to the SHIELD family before we get to the SHIELD hero himself. The ex-intern of the SHIELD hero, Raphtalia. But before that, Raphtalia was just a normal demi-human girl living with her parents in a small village. Let's just skip. Okay, so after that, she spent a while as an intern with some, well, I struggle to call them humans for obvious reasons. Hard to call them that when they go buying people. Sure, maybe some of them treated their interns well, but that's still a line you don't cross easily. And even then it doesn't matter because the ones who owned Raphtalia didn't deserve to breathe. At all. Eventually Raphtalia got sick, the guy sold her back to this creepy guy, where she was eventually picked up by the SHIELD hero. This was actually one of the best things for her. Raphtalia had grown up hearing stories of the SHIELD hero saving demi-humans. So while she was scared at first due to her previous owners, and well, honestly, Naofumi was kinda being a dick, he still took care of her, gave her medicine, fed her, and took on the role of a father. And during this time, Raphtalia trained with a dagger and eventually a sword, since the SHIELD hero can't use anything but his shield. He really isn't the best at dishing out damage. Raphtalia also grew up like super fast during this time. Apparently that's how demi-humans do that. They age normally, yes, but they can also age through leveling up. And apparently this aging can also be reversed if they lose those levels. But at least it's better than pulling an actual child into combat. Not like he hasn't done that before, but Melty kinda pushed herself into the party there. I'm not going to get into the weird stuff with what all that aging means. Raphtalia matured physically and mentally throughout these levels and time, so I'm just going to not focus on that. We all know anime is weird. So instead, let's look at what we have for her lineage. In this world, Raphtalia is a demi-human, specifically a tanuki, which until this show came out I kind of thought were the same thing as raccoons, but yeah, they're not. Anyway, there is not a tanuki species in D&D, or a demi-human species for that matter. That's just like everything that's vaguely human. So our actual options here are kind of limited. Again, my head went to the shifter first, they do have animal traits, and one of their options is the ability to be really fast, which is something we're looking for here with Raphtalia. But barring the shifters, we do have one other option, which if you're willing to give it a little bit of extra flavor, I think fits her really well. And that is, despite Raphtalia not being a cat, the tabaxi, with the extra flavor just being a typical anime animal girl and not a giant anthropomorphic cat person. Now either of these two options could work, but I didn't want the speed thing to be temporary, linked to a transformation, and the same goes for stealth, which tabaxi get with their cat's talent, along with feline agility, so she can have a huge burst of speed when she needs to, as long as she takes a breather in between rounds. Oh, I also gave Raphtalia the Wayfarer background, because, yeah, I know I could have made a custom one, but I didn't really want to. Moving on. Right to her stats. Promise this will be really fast, she has a pretty straightforward stat lineup. First, Raphtalia started off using daggers, and later on moving to slimmer swords. Never anything too heavy. On top of that, she is very nimble, so a high dex along with a high charisma. After all, she's going to be the one talking the SHIELD hero down and keeping him grounded while he's dealing with everything the world has dropped on him. So having a nice calming voice in his ear might be a good idea. After that, a decent amount of con, nothing too high, so like 14, a just above average wisdom score because she does have a good sense of hearing, but a +1 is fine since she can increase that with her skills later. And I'm going to say an average intelligence of 10 is fine. She can read even at her youngest. And lastly, Raphtalia really doesn't have a lot of muscle on her, so she's going to be dumping strength. See, that hardly took any time at all, and now we can move on to how Raphtalia fights. As Raphtalia trained and grew in level, she learned a lot about sword fighting, which is her main role in the party as the sword of the shield hero. So naturally, she's pretty good with a sword, but she can also use magic, like most people in this world. But Raphtalia specifically has an affinity for dark, light, and illusion magic, which she can use to turn invisible and stab this crazy redhead lady in the back. But she can also make illusions of herself, speed herself up, and generally be really hard to pin down. But it's also no surprise, given the genre, that she can channel magic directly into her sword for skills like Crescent Moon Sword or Stardust Blade. And later on, spoilers by the way, Raphtalia actually becomes a hero herself. Not a cardinal hero like the others, but a vassal hero. Vassal heroes are chosen by the vassal weapons, and Raphtalia happens to get the katana, becoming the katana hero, or vassal katana, whatever you want to call it. Now since Raphtalia started off with just a sword and no magic, I wanted to start with that. And while you could go with a normal fighter, or maybe even a paladin for her oath to be the sword of the shield hero, which maybe I'll do as like an alternate Raphtalia build since I do like that idea. But instead, given her start with daggers, her lack of anything that I would consider heavy or even medium armor, and the fact that Raphtalia can one-shot things if she gets the drop on them, I think an interesting option is to go with the rogue. They can boost her stealth and her perception with expertise, they get weapon mastery, and of course, sneak attack. But that is only the start, since I plan on giving Raphtalia a total of 7 levels in Rogue, with all those going into the Swashbuckler subclass. Meaning 2 things. First, Raphtalia can dip in and out of combat with either Filo or Naofumi, without having to worry about being counterattacked thanks to fancy footwork, and Ricochet lets her both add her charisma modifier to her initiative so she strikes first more often, but it also means she doesn't need anyone nearby her target to use sneak attack, so the only thing stopping her is going to be if she has disadvantage for some reason. She also gets Uncanny Dodge and Evasion for her own defenses, on top of an ASI/feat. With this ASI going into Charisma to bump it up to 16, because the next class she's jumping into kinda needs it, and it's probably not what you're thinking. Now a lot of the time I like to go with a Warlock for spell swords. They are now the only one that can attack 3 times instead of just 2 without any special buffs, and it really helps to make up for some of their lack of spell slots. But before we decide on that, let's once again look at Raphtalia's magic. So like I said before, most of her magic is illusion, light, or dark magic, like First Light, First Mirage, White Hide Mirage, and a buffing spell called High Quick. Expanding this to her vassal katana skills, she can absorb magic with Powder Snow, cut ghosts, and even make small tornadoes, which is a pretty wide net. And for that, I think there is one class that not only will get Raphtalia even better stuff with a sword, but also cover pretty much all of her magic. And for that, we are not going with a Warlock this time, and instead we're going to hop over to a Bard. But Raphtalia isn't a normal Bard. She doesn't sing or play any instrument, no. She fights. She is the sword to Naofumi's shield. So she is going to be a College of Swords Bard, giving her the dueling fighting style, Blade Flourish letting her spend inspiration die to deal extra damage on her attacks on top of her sneak attack die, and giving them extra effects, ranging from increasing her AC, hitting multiple creatures, and pushing creatures away so she can make a quick escape. Okay, she's really not going to have a use for the last one since she has fancy footwork, but the other 2 are useful, especially the AC one. Because right now, with some basic stud leather armor, her AC could be anywhere from 16 at base to 24 with defensive flourish. And at max level for where I'm going to put her, 29 with something we don't quite have yet. She might actually have a higher AC than Naofumi sometimes, but we'll see. Now let's keep going since I did mention this would cover her magic too. And yeah, bards get a ton of different spells. Not that I'm against busting into other spell lists for 1 or 2 things, but still it's nice to have a wide net you don't have to ask your DM for. But honestly, her spells weren't all that hard to get. Her illusion stuff can be covered with Minor Image, Illusory Script, Silent Image, Invisibility both normal and greater, and Major Image. And since she can make clones to distract people, Mirror Image is an easy grab, and Haste for High Quick, meaning she can attack even more. And those attacks are made even stronger when Wizards of the Coast happens to add a spell that fits almost 1-to-1 with Crescent Moon Sword, Font of Moonlight. It's an action for her to cast, lasts 10 whole minutes, gives her resistance to radiant damage, and adds an extra 2d6 radiant damage onto every attack she makes. But there is one more skill Raphtalia has for her katana that I really want to get because it's kind of her biggest hitter right now. And that is Stardust Blade, which charges up her sword with magic and then releases it in a big explosion. And thankfully there is a spell for that, even if it isn't technically on the Bard list. Has that stopped me before? No. And will it stop me right now? Also no. And that spell is Holy Weapon, which not only adds 2d8 radiant damage to every attack made with the weapon, it becomes magical if it wasn't already, but as an action, you can cause the blade to explode, dealing 4d8 radiant damage to anything of your choice within 30 feet, and can blind them if they fail to save. And if that isn't the perfect fit for a Stardust Blade, I got nothing else. Also, I will say I thought this spell was 4th level until I was literally writing this section, and I had to do a little shifting around the levels so I could actually get level 5 spells, which means instead of getting this when I originally intended for her to get it with Rogue, Raphtalia is going to get the defensive dueling feat here as a Bard, along with a +2 to her dex. And at a total level of 16, with 9 in Bard and 7 in Rogue, she can add 5 to her AC as a reaction with her defensive duelist parry, bringing her max AC without any spells or help from Naofumi to 29. Raphtalia might be the Sword of the Shield, but I'll be damned, she's pretty close to being a shield herself.
Not on my watch.
Okay, it feels really weird being at the end of a video and only just now getting to the main character, so let's wrap this up. Naofumi Iwatani, a normal college student just doing his own thing. Now I know where you think this is going. He's going to be given a surprise visit by a truck-kun while pushing someone out of the way, or gets stabbed randomly in the street. But surprisingly, no.
Not this time.
Instead, he is taken from his home by a book. Yep, he opens a book, reads a few pages before it flashbangs him, and he ends up in another world surrounded by some of the stupidest people around. Especially you. And from here, Naofumi has a really rough start of it. The king instantly shows more favor to the other heroes, and at first not a single person wants to join his party. He did eventually get someone to join him, the eldest princess, Melty, who instantly betrays him, spending all of his money and framing him for forcing himself on her while drunk, despite him not drinking and of course not even being in the same room. This caused a lot of problems for obvious reasons. 1. Melty is the princess, and 2. The Kingdom of Melmark is a matriarchal society, so those kind of acts are punished especially harshly. If Naofumi hadn't been one of the 4 cardinal heroes, there to save the world, he would have been executed on the spot. It's also around here that Naofumi realizes he can't use any other weapons. His shield just won't let him, so he needs someone to do the damage for him. And since everyone in the kingdom thinks he is the scummiest kind of person, he decides he only has one choice. Now I talked about it a bit with Raphtalia, but buying another person isn't something you do easily. But unfortunately that's what the world pushed him to do. Not an excuse, just an observation. Thankfully, things did work out in the end, but if he was a worse person, things could have gone much, much worse. So what he decided on after being attacked in the streets was he needed someone who couldn't disobey him, as bad as that sounds. He went to this creepy guy and ended up purchasing a tanuki, otherwise known as Raphtalia. And despite his original goal of just using her as a weapon, he quickly saw that just like him, this world had betrayed her too. She was sickly, weak, and suffering from nightmares since, she kinda watched her parents get eaten. And even through his cold and harsh tones, he took care of her, giving her medicine, food, clothing, even buying her toys. Sure, he claimed it was all just to make her a better tool, but if that was really the case, he wouldn't have risked his life to save her and told her to run when fighting this big dog monster. And eventually that training pulled through, with him and Raphtalia turning into a great team, protecting a town from the waves and working together really well. He even got strong enough to pretty much beat the spear hero in a 1v1, with a little help from the monsters he kept under his coat. Up until the crazy redhead cheated in front of everyone and no one cared because they all suck. Mostly because, like I mentioned near the start of the video, they follow the Church of the 3 Heroes and hate the shield, which did thankfully get fixed when the king and Melty's schemes were exposed and Naofumi was proven innocent. But since you only ever get one first impression, he still had a reputation as a thug. But for anyone that actually knew him, they know he's just prickly on the outside. Now, let's get these things here out of the way real quick, since obviously I'm going to make Naofumi a human, and big surprise, he's taking the tough feat. He's kind of the tank of the party, that's his whole deal. And while I could make a custom background for being summoned from another world, Naofumi was actually posing as, or I guess just actually being a traveling merchant for a while. So the merchant background with the lucky feet seems fine. He does keep stumbling across the leftover remains of the other heroes' quests and cleaning up their messes, and gets some extra rewards out of it, so that's kinda lucky, I guess. He also gets weavers and smith's tools, which fit for him going around as a merchant, as well as skills like animal handling, since animals really seem to like him, persuasion, and deception for lying about being the shield hero. Now, looking at everything Naofumi does throughout the early parts of the anime, and a bit later, I think his stats are fairly easy to put together. Starting off with a super high constitution and intelligence score. He not only figured out multiple ways to make his shield stronger while the other heroes were stuck in one way, but he's also very strategic in how he uses his shields both alone and in combination with his team, like using airstrike shields as platforms for Raphtalia and Filo to jump off of. Figuring out that the SP sapping shield hurt Glass, who until then wasn't really hurt by anything he did, and overall is pretty good using his non-combat shields too. After that, a little strength, not a ton, but more than your average guy wearing a big breastplate, and while he's not exactly light on his feet, he can still jump up in the air, punch a zombie in the face, and land with no problem, so I think 12 dex is fine. 10 wisdom, I would say it was higher, but him not getting tricked anymore isn't really about him seeing through lies and more just not trusting people. And of course, with an attitude like this, Naofumi is throwing whatever charisma he had out the window after his life got turned upside down. Too bad for him he doesn't get to be a prince. He does get to be a duke though. But outside of his stats, the main thing you want to look at for Naofumi are his shields. He has a ton of these. Some of them make his potion effect stronger, have dog heads on them that bite people, can trap people in shield prisons, or have specific defenses for different elements. One of the stronger things he has though is his Wrath Shield, which, you guessed it, is powered by his rage for the world at large, and burns everything around him. Technically it also curses them, but we're just gonna not look at that part. He also has the Iron Maiden, a combo skill with the Wrath Shield and Shield Prison that I'm gonna be 100% honest, I don't think I can get this. It's just, I'm not seeing it. But if any of you guys have an idea of how to do it, please leave it in the comments. And while most of his shields are, shields and protect, he does have a select few that are purely offensive, like the Spirit Turtle shield that fires a giant laser out of it. And something that's not really a shield at all, his Blood Sacrifice, which is part of the Wrath Shield. It does a bunch of damage to himself, and makes a giant bear trap thing under himself so they get chomped to death. Kinda gory, also not sure I can get this, but I'll try. And obviously he can use all of his shields, like, shields to block stuff and tank hits, like in his fight with Glass during the third wave, I think? So with all these different spells and shields, I think there are two directions we need to go in if we want to cover as much of this as we can. And that starts with exactly 5 levels in Fighter for the Eldritch Knight subclass, giving him the Interception fighting style, letting him block attacks by giving the attacker disadvantage, but also Warbond for his shield, so he can summon it at will to him, even if he really doesn't want it sometimes. And of course, since he needs this feat at level 4, Naofumi is going to take the Shield Master feat, so he can block AoEs with his shield, or just bash people in the face with it. And we're only going 5 levels in because, yes, Naofumi is pretty strong, able to defend against the Spear Hero, but he relies heavily on his shield skills. And the best way to represent those skills is with spells, and there are only so many he can get with a 1/3 caster. For example, here at level 5, he only has first level spells like Shield and Tensor's Floating Disc. So instead, to get the rest of his armory, Naofumi is going to spend the rest of his levels as a wizard, getting spells like Protection from Good and Evil, Aid, Counterspell, Dispel Magic, Fear, and a few more that I'll talk about in a minute. Because first, we need to talk about his school of magic, that being War Magic. Because War Magic wizards get Arcane Deflection, letting him up his AC by 2, or his saves against spells by 4. Now that is as a reaction, which for AC isn't the best, shield is +5, but if he wants to save spell slots or just doesn't have any left, it's still something. And the +4 to spell saves is really going to help fighting the crazy redhead who keeps trying to murder you and her own little sister. And any other crazy spellcasters, because there's a strange amount of those. Now before I mentioned the Spirit Turtle shield with its big laser beam. Well, War Magic also has something that can boost that. Power Surge, which is why I got Counterspell, since you can kind of reflavor that as just blocking a spell with a specific shield, and when you do, you get to add extra damage to a spell you cast equal to your wizard level. And the only spell fitting for the giant laser beam from the Spirit Turtle is Disintegrate, which already does a ton of damage, and adding extra damage on top of that is just kind of insult to injury, but why not? I wasn't even going this far into Wizard for Power Surge, I really wanted Durable Magic, giving Naofumi another +2 AC and +2 to saves while concentrating on a spell, which a lot of his spells use concentration. Oh, and if you want, grab Shield of Faith from the Paladin list. It's not technically on the Wizard list, but it's got Shield in the name, so yeah. So with all this in mind, assuming that Naofumi is wearing Half Plate, yes, I'm calling this Half Plate, For 15 AC, plus 1 from Dex, plus 2 from his actual shield, plus 2 from Shield of Faith, another plus 2 from Durable Magic, and plus 5 from Shield, he can have a 27 AC. Which is consistently higher than Raphtalia's 29, but she does still have a higher max AC than the Shield hero. Which is fine. A lot of Naofumi's tankiness comes from his spells like Globe of Invulnerability, Wall of Force, and Resilient Sphere to trap people with little balloon monsters. Oh, he also gets 2 ASIs, a plus 2 in Con, and a plus 2 in Intelligence for his spell saves. And the last thing to touch on, since I don't think I can get the Iron Maiden or Blood Sacrifice, is going to be the Wrath Shield, which thankfully there's a spell for that. It will drop his AC by 2 while he uses it, since it doesn't give him any extra AC, but Fire Shield does damage to anything that attacks you while you're on fire, which is pretty damn close. And with all these shields, Naofumi should have no problem protecting his daughters and anyone else who isn't a complete prick.
You can use all the dirty, underhanded tricks you can think of. I'll protect my team no matter what you do. You'll never take anything from me again.
Hey, thank you for sticking around until the end of the video. Remember, if you are looking to give a gift to your forever DM, why not check out the Wandering Tavern and use my code GMG for 10% off. As always, thank you to my testers for looking over these builds, and my patrons who voted on the Shield Hero. And for the next video, you guys have already voted, putting Persona 5 on the chopping block. That one's gonna be a bit rough. There are a ton of characters to choose from, outside of Joker. I kinda have to do Joker. But that is about it. I will see you all next time, and as always, have a wonderful day.